Hello. So I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about the the archetype of the dark knight, or in um, the realm of Scorpio, which we could say is the dark knight, but Scorpio is also the feminine domicile of Mars. And so we could also say like one emanation of the dark feminine, or this kind of like Kali-esque energy. And it's based on the chart that I am seeing for the new moon. And so I just really quickly wanted to go into that. The other day, I shared a pretty it was a little on the long side um, transmission about this new moon and how the new moon is opposing Uranus, and how that is related to a tower moment. And I got very deeply into what a tower moment is. And so you can find that video on my YouTube. But I want to talk a little bit about Mars and the journey of Mars overall, like the Mars cycle. We talk about the Venus cycle pretty often. It's something I do a lot of deep teachings in, but all planets have a synodic cycle, right? And astrology is essentially a language of archetypes and symbolisms and mythology. And so what could the symbolism of Mars in Scorpio conjunct the sun have to say to us now as a people, right? Like, what are the messages that it's giving us? So Mars as a cycle, Mars is here down in Scorpio, and in this particular chart for the new moon on the 13th, it is conjunct the moon and the sun. um, Mars as a planet will move away from the sun in different parts of its cycle and then come to a conjunction. And that happens about once every 2 years, that the moon, or the sun and Mars get together. So it's not very often that we have the sun moving this closely with Mars. But at some point in his cycle, he gets close enough to the sun that we could say that they're in a conjunction. And when they travel closely together, so out of a 2.4 year cycle, they will travel close together for a few months, right? And so Mars got close enough to the sun to say that he was in the underworld right at the end of September. I think it was September 24th, that he dipped into what we call the underworld. And we say that he's in the underworld because when Mars is so close to the sun, we cannot see him. And so therefore, we are not getting the direct influence, or the Martian impulse in the way that we normally do when he's separated from the sun and his light can hit us directly. So with this Mars in the quote unquote underworld, this is just like Venus. When Venus is in the underworld, we can't feel her presence on the planet. We literally feel sort of like she's gone. As what happens when Mars is in the underworld? Well, all of a sudden, our connection to our own personal power, our sense of dominance, authority, assertiveness, they all sort of get cut off. And when those things get cut off, we have to rely on our ego and our external structures of power to get things done. And so there's sort of like this sacred connection that is lost, or like a Mars sort of in the 12th house, right? There's like this unconscious Mars that is acting up. Also, when Mars is in the underworld, it's like there's secrets, there's stuff going on in the background that we don't fully know about. It's not a plugged in Mars. Mars, however, is always in the sky. He is always in the solar system. And he is right now in the sign of Scorpio, which is associated with the dark, with the mystery. Scorpio is associated with cataclysm and chaos, like that, the terrible or terrific power of nature when nature is acting in a destructive way, right? Thus, we get sort of the dark feminine vibes from Scorpio. Um, Scorpio is a water sign, yes, but with Mars as the ruler and Pluto as the co ruler, Mars brings a sense of fire to Scorpio, and Pluto, this Plutonic underworld theme. And so, like, a good element or analogy for how we could understand the nature of Scorpio is lava. It's like this deep alchemical substance that lays almost dormant, or it's seemingly dormant to inhabitants of Earth, underneath the surface of the Earth, and then erupts in this fiery explosion, the seemingly underworld substance coming up and destroying things in its path, right? And so, when I was looking at this chart, I kept hearing the words The Dark Knight. And The Dark Knight is a movie about Batman as well. And I know that in the collective right now, there has been a conversation about things like Children of the Dark and, Children of the Light. And so I just want to make clear that my use of the words Dark Knight doesn't get conflated with those analogies, those ridiculous analogies that are being made right now. So anyways, The Dark Knight and Batman. So what do we think of when we think of a knight, right? We think about Lancelot, right? Arthur, the Round Table, and the whole Grail mystery mythological epoch really does have to do with the West and solar consciousness and solar cults. And before Arthur and the Round Table came, his father Uther's kingdom was very opposed to magic. And in mythology, magic is always ruled by the feminine, the mystery. There's the mists of Avalon, and so like what exists beyond the veil. So he was very opposed to this, and he killed anyone who was magical. All of the druids, that whole religion was stamped out in Uther, King Arthur's father's reign. There was this desire to hold that back, and they were very Christianized and very solar in a sense. And so when Arthur came into his reign, there was this big campaign to get him to accept magic again, right? To accept the druids again, and to have that lunar sense of life. And so the Grail mysteries and the Arthurian mysteries are all about this kind of like uniting of the sun and the moon, and how people through different diversities live together, right? And so when we think of knights and the Knights of the Round Table, we often think about this very kind of like, and for the most part, we in the West like to at least think that we think like this, that this is part of our ethos and our values, that we value diversity and we value humanity in these really upright and evolved humanistic ways. The ways of the Christian humanist is kind of the Western mythos, let's say. We're all sort of steeped in these ideas. And a knight who goes and fights on the behalf of these ideas feels very justified in their fight, right? And we really all, there's really no hope for any of us. We get stuck in some very kind of evangelical types of nihilism, right? If we don't have mythology and storytelling. And it would be very easy if countries took their citizens to war over things like natural resources, let's say, for citizens to fall into a very nihilistic and hopeless state of being, because I don't think we'd ever see it as a sound justification to go to war and kill children and families and whatnot over natural resources, right? And so that's why these great mythologies are conjured up from the underworld and revived, and life is like blown into them in the collective, so that we all can identify who the hero and the villain is in a war story and give our consent to that. But what happens when we live already, or this paradigm is already inverted, and we can't really identify who the villain or the good guy is in a scenario? Like, what if that's just not really clear? How do we engage a fight, right? A sense of justice, like engage our knighthood in a scenario when all of these things are clouded? And this is kind of where the dark night enters. And I think that the dark night archetype is really important right now. And I also think it's sort of one that we can all get on board with, um, or feel good about being on board with, especially if we find ourselves in this scenario where we ourselves are having trouble navigating a very seemingly complex um complex outpicturing. Like the outpicturing is very complex. We have had Neptune definitely in active in the sky and hitting different planets. And Neptune creates a kind of fog or a mist. It's the planet that's associated with Maya and illusion. And so that element has definitely been stirred up here, not allowing us to feel clear, or the cleanliness of our position, like the place that we stand, we're not quite sure where that is right now. And in addition, I want to point out, when we have this new moon, this last decan of Scorpio, these last two decans of Scorpio are what is active. So right now, on the 8th is the day I'm recording this, the sun and moon are in Scorpio, but we can see that the decan of Scorpio that it's in is Neptune, right? So this is fog. And if you want to add the Martian quality to it, it's literally fog of war. And then, of course, the moon acts in a similar kind of way, where it sort of filters out things to make our experience of life more digestible. Kind of the way that a mother censors what children watch, the moon kind of has that, acts that way on the population, just sort of softening and distorting reality just enough that we can stay comfortable. So just know that those are active as we're all trying to navigate this difficult time. So the Dark Knight, in an upside down world, he doesn't obey authority, right? He comes up against, because he's in a double inversion already. Like, things are upside down already. Remember, we don't know who the villain or the good guy is in this scenario. So there's already been some corruption of our pure story that's happened. So the Dark Knight makes himself an enemy of the corrupted order in order to restore proper order. So the way that we can understand this, so like in the story of Batman, the Dark Knight, Batman, he works on behalf of the the government, right? Like he actually works on behalf of, well, the people, but in tandem with the government. But in this scenario, there's something corrupted inside of the element of the government. And so it appears, in a sense, that Batman is working in opposition to or challenging the authority of the government. But his real intention is to root out the corruption inside the government so that order can be restored and power is given back again to a kind of like morally cleaned out government entity. So he's not trying necessarily to disrupt or overturn or have a coup against, or demolish or expel. Like he's not looking for an absolutist outcome. And he's not, this is very important with the Dark Knight archetype, he's not looking for power himself. So it's not him in a fight against the government so that he can usurp the power. He's not somebody who's trying to do a coup so that he then becomes the powerful person. And so this archetype can look like a rebel. It's kind of like what we all do when we go and we march against certain things that our government is doing. When we marched against the Vietnam War, or especially the Iraq War is a good example, because there was a corrupt element that took us to that war. At the heart of that war was a lie about WMDs. So when the people started to get angry, they weren't protesting against the government to change or overthrow the government. It wasn't like a war of absolution, like the way a country that goes into, like Russia wants to do with Ukraine. Russia's gone into Ukraine and it wants to take power over Ukraine. It's not a war for like land. The Dark Knight is warring against the corrupt element in service to the restoration of the moral power center. I hope I'm making sense. So one of the analogies that can go along with sort of like a Dark Knight archetype is the story of when Jesus went to the temple and found the money changers in the temple. And he got very angry because money changers are not supposed to be in the temple. They're this corrupting element, right? I don't even know for myself personally what the historical issue with the money changers was. So somebody can fill me in on why they were such a problem. I just know they weren't supposed to be at the temple, that was a place of worship, and they were doing like commercial business at the temple. And so Jesus got very angry, this guy that we've always seen as a pacifist and very loving and very nurturing. But in this moment, he gets angry and he overturns the money changers' tables and shows us this display of what it looks like to get angry in service to like divine alignment, right? And then the money changers end up being taken out. But the people who run the temple are not happy with Jesus that he's done this. They see him as a challenge to their authority, and they get angry and they try to smear him, and they tell lies about him. And so eventually this gets worked out and the temple is restored to its moral clarity and its divine alignment. But in the meantime, there's this sort of struggle, right, to uninvert, see, the inversion that's happened, where in the temple and the temple keepers had sort of created this illusion that it was okay for money lenders to be at the temple, that this was permissible and this was in divine alignment, right? Like where there was this sense that this illusion was pulling people out of their moral center and their moral clarity. And so Jesus in this story, acting as the Dark Knight, came in to return divine alignment to the temple. And so it is the same thing when we take on the archetype of the Dark Knight. When we see that our government has a corrupting entity at the center of it, and when we go out to protest, they may label us as troublemakers or challengers or try to smear our name in some capacity. But what this archetype is doing is actually asking for divine alignment to be restored, asking for us to be who we say we are, right? To follow the tenets of our documents, whether that be a spiritual book, if we're talking about religion, or it be our Constitution or Declaration of Independence, like the things that we stand for, like we want to be in alignment with those. And so when we see our government or our religion getting out of alignment, the Dark Knight comes in to restore this divine alignment. And while he's doing it, he looks like he's an enemy. He appears as an enemy in some way, right? And we see in like certain countries right now protests for things that we normally value are being outlawed, which is such an interesting inversion. And so we know that in times where there's an inversion, we sort of need a double inversion to restore alignment. And so I guess part of what I wanted to say in this Mars transmission and this looking at Mars as the dark night or the Kali feminine who comes in with her wrath and her rage and her anger to restore divine alignment. This is what we're seeing play out in the collective. And this is actually a moral stance. So no matter how much somebody tries to distort the idea of it being a moral stance, it is, because I think we can see that there are some out of alignment factors at the heart of this conflict. Like most notably, there are some really interesting natural resources deals happening between two larger blocks of governments, right, that seem to sort of be fighting for who's going to supply natural gas to another part of the world. And so, like, when you pull the veneer back of all of the mythological posturing that's happening and all of the different tropes and memes and characters that the propaganda machines are throwing at us to try to get our consent one way or the other, or to try and divide people, right? Like this idea that supporting freedom for one group of people is actually supporting the villain terrorist is it does seem like that's not actually an organic thought that we would arrive at on our own. It's almost as if that's being injected into the global dialogue, and then people somehow, through cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias, grab onto it and believe it's true, or they don't. I mean, not everybody is as propaganda savvy as everybody else, but like we can start to see these themes if we're really paying attention. And now what I've seen happen with the United States in particular is this that we've done some polling, and the people of the United States are not where the government is. Like they're on two different pages as far as what they'd like to see happening. And so the United States is walking back its stance a little bit and saying, we don't like what they're doing, but we have no control over it. Meanwhile, they're sending money and tools for conflict over to so the right hand and the left hand are not doing the same thing essentially. And so we may see more and more of this dark night entity or archetype begin to erupt. And this is a very natural and organic archetype. This archetype lives within all of us, where we are a no to, and by corruption, what I mean is like where that divine organic alignment with a moral compass, like when a child can look at something and be like, nope, that's wrong, through the eyes of innocence, and they know it's wrong. Like that's kind of where our compass for divine alignment is. Like not a child that's been conditioned or indoctrinated in anything, but like a child who's uncorrupted, just innocent. If they can look at that and be like, nope, that shouldn't be happening, that's wrong. Those values are pretty safe to align with, I found over time, right? It's like we never really go wrong when we protect innocence and align ourselves with things that are uncorrupted, and have the desire for people who lead us and have authority and control over our lives and what we do, or who do things in our name. We never really go wrong being a stand for what is moral, and to ask for that morality to be to be enacted equally across the board, liberally, not to be picking and choosing where we're going to have a certain kind of morality and where we aren't. And so I just wanted to talk about this because I think we're really going to see this activated. It's active now. So the 8th, it was active the last few days, it got really activated. And I think we're going to really see it as we move through this new moon, this kind of like dark night archetype start to really come to the forefront and just be a stand for values and rightness and truth and like, and I mean natural law truth, like here's what's good, here's what's in alignment with our rightness and our shared global values. um and so anyways, I just wanted to say that. Thanks for listening, appreciate it.